end. So
Oh no, not for today's meeting. I am asking something else. Okay.
okay. I'm not aware of that, ma'am. Sorry. I can
Okay.
ask him and get back to you.
No, it's okay. Actually, Dr. Dhar Chakraborty will call him. But if he is not well, it's difficult.
I think he'll be like okay. You can like message him and ask him. It's okay. He'll like reply back. It's just that he has a throat infection and he's having trouble speaking.
Okay.
Uh, Good afternoon, Surya sir. Shall we start, sir?
Please, Anilji.
Thank you very much, sir. So a very good afternoon and happy Ganesh Chaturthi to all the distinguished dignitaries, panelists, and the participants. May the Lord Ganesh bless all of us happiness, prosperity, and strength for begetting a disaster resilient nation. And I welcome you all in today's webinar on earthquake risk reduction challenges and opportunities that is jointly organized by National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, and All India Disaster Mitigation Institute from Gujarat. Uh, Recently, on 14th August 2021, Caribbean nation of Haiti was jolted by an earthquake of magnitude 7.2, in which more than 2,000 people were killed and around 12,000 were injured. And besides damaging a large number of buildings, and once again, the geological hazards earthquake has shown is a destructive strength. And when we talk about our nation, around 59% of our landmass is exposed to earthquakes. From 1993 Latur earthquake to recent Assam earthquake in 2021, we have witnessed many devastating earthquakes that cause significant losses, losses of precious life, economic losses, and losses of our infrastructure and structure. And another facet of earthquake is that its capability to produce two destructive disasters, one in coastal, that is tsunami, and other one in hilly terrain landslides. So therefore, we need to make a major commitment to increase the resilience of our community, of our infrastructure structures, as well as of our people against the earthquake. So in today's webinar, we will look to discuss techniques for the earthquake resistant sustainable development, as well as challenges for earthquake risk mitigation, and what are the opportunities we have to strengthen the resilience against the earthquake. So today in the inaugural session, it will be graced with the presence of Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division NIDM, and Mr. Chichit Gupta from All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. Actually, Sri Mihir Bhatt's Director AIDMI was supposed to join us, but due to some health issue, he is unavailable for the webinar. And in technical session, we have two eminent speakers. Dr. Mahua Mukherjee, Professor, Department of Architecture and Planning from IIT Roorkee, and Dr. Hari Kumar, he is coordinator in Geohazard International. So starting our inaugural session, I pass on the stage to Mr. Kshitij Gupta from All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, and being from the state which is highly vulnerable to seismic risk. Mr. Gupta will certainly have a lot of to share about the earthquakes. So with these words, I pass on the mic to you, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anilji. Thank you, sir. Um, a very good afternoon to all the esteemed panel members, panelists, and the participants who have joined us today for this important webinar. I know that because the communication was sent that Mr. Mihir Bhatt would be taking this keynote address, you must have been very excited, and now you must have been disappointed that he's not joining and instead I am there. It's unfortunate, but he has shared what he wanted to say in this webinar with me, and we are here to kind of share the insights that the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, our organization, has had in terms of experience and expertise in working with the low income and vulnerable communities of India when it comes to disaster risk reduction, especially earthquake risk reduction. So, why is earthquake risk mitigation an important theme or an important topic to have discussion about? So, just as Anilji had mentioned earlier, almost 60% of India's total landmass is vulnerable to very severe to severe earthquakes. Now, just put that in perspective that more than half of the country is at risk of getting affected by a big seismic event, which can not only destroy infrastructure, kill people, but it can also set back the clock on hard earned development gains that have come to India after the 1991 economic liberalization. So it's very important to focus on that. And our recent experiences, like just as Anilji mentioned, that as recent as in like the Assam earthquake of 2021, it just shows that the danger is still there. And there is a preponderance of scientific studies and scientific journals that point to the fact that India may be in for a very big earthquake. So it's always better to be prepared, especially the Himalayan region, where like so many earthquakes have already happened in the past. Maybe a big earthquake is on its way. So it's very important to be prepared for an event of that magnitude. Uh, the 2011 census of India basically said that there are 330 million housing units in the country, out of which the BMTPC has said that 30%, which are in the countryside or some even in the urban areas, are made up of material that is not earthquake resistant at all, which means that they can simply be destroyed by a very moderate earthquake as well. That is again a threat to the built infrastructure of this country and to its country and to our countrymen, which is why it's important to focus on this important theme of earthquake risk mitigation. Now, while there are so many threats from earthquakes, the risks of earthquakes, there are also some opportunities that are there for us to work towards. I'm sure Dr. Mukherjee in her technical session would like touch upon these techniques a lot and we would be enlightened by it. But at the same time, I would like to point in a general direction, stating that there are tools present at the moment for urban planners and architects and decision makers sitting in the government to make India more resilient when it comes to seismic hazards. For instance, there is the Vulnerability Atlas of India, which has been prepared by VMTPC, which can be a powerful tool to accomplish this kind of seismic resilience in India. Now, when we talk about seismic resilience or the opportunities that can be there, there's also alignment with India's National Disaster Management Plan as well as the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction. The SFDRR, to which our own NDMP is closely aligned to, like explicitly states that we have to leverage science and technology to make risk sensitive decisions when it comes to planning, and this can fit perfectly in line with our strategy for earthquake risk mitigation. In fact, there can be a combination of hard as well as soft approaches when it comes to earthquake risk mitigation. We at AIDMI have constantly worked with soft approaches on our own and have been honored to work with sectoral experts in promoting hard approaches as well. Like a hard approach can include retrofitting or adopting resilient building codes which ensures seismic resistance and resilience. Soft measures can include uh, comprehensive and inclusive risk assessments of earthquake hazard. Similarly, mock drills are also something that are classified under the soft approaches that can be taken for this. Another opportunity lies in aligning the SDGs and resilient urban planning in India. Now, Goal 11 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals states explicitly that the aim is to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And it targets include the promotion of resilience to disasters such as earthquakes. Now, many of India's cities actually lie in high intensity zones, which have been determined by seismic microzonation. Now, if we were to work towards this, then we would also be working towards one of the sustainable development goals too. And therefore, there is a need for a coherence of national, state, and regional policy to come together to build this resilience, to build this seismic resilience. So that is also an opportunity. Uh, there is also the issue of earthquake challenges and opportunities of earthquake risk mitigation at historical and heritage sites. We all remember the devastating images that we saw of the 2015 Nepal earthquake, how the heritage structures in Kathmandu, that Dharara tower that came crashing down. And we have so much built heritage here in India, and we need to protect that as well. So while that is a challenge that they have been built, we have structures which are almost millennia old, it is also an opportunity for us to like retrofit them and like see what can be done to make them more resilient to the hazard of earthquakes. Uh, in respect to another opportunity, I think the importance of mock drills, simulations, and tabletop exercises, something which the Honorable NDMA of our country has taken a lead in doing, that importance remains unparalleled. While a lot has been done, I think a lot more can be done if we have been targeting major cities when it comes to simulations and tabletop exercises, perhaps these mock drills ought to reach to all kinds of schools and hospitals and all other important public institutions in not only major cities but also tier 2 and tier 3 towns of India, all of which may lie on seismically active zones. Uh, we all know that India is a high population density country. We have so many cities where people are just jam packed together, living in unplanned infrastructure where no heed to building codes has been paid. So that is basically a recipe for disaster. And as of March 2016, the Vulnerability Atlas actually states that there are 107 cities and towns across the country that are seismically vulnerable, and like out of them at least 10 or 12 cities have a population of over like a million people. So it is very important to introduce soft as well as hard techniques for earthquake risk mitigation there to reconcile this risk with the existing realities and reduce this risk. um, Finally, I would also like to touch upon that while this is a technical session and we are talking about strategies, it is also important to mention that there needs to be some coherence between earthquake risk mitigation and affordable housing. In our cities, we considerably see that there are a lot of people who struggle find affordable housing. Perhaps these areas of earthquake resilience, affordable housing, and sustainable planning can be brought together, and an overlap of sustainable earthquake resilient urban housing could be found. So these were the opening insights that I wanted to share, something to set the tone for these sessions. Thank you so much again from AIDMI side, from Mr. Mihir Bhatt side, and from my side for inviting us. Thank you. Over to you, Anilji.
Thank you very much, sir, for your address and highlighting the specialization of AIDMI. And we agree that preparedness is key for reducing the risk of earthquakes. So thank you very much. And please be with us for the validation session as well. So now I pass on the floor to Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division and NIDM, and request sir to kindly share his vast knowledge and experience with us and with our participants through his address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anilji. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
All right. Good afternoon to all, and warm welcome to the distinguished guest of our inaugural program, including Professor Mahua Mukherjee from IIT Roorkee, Kshitij Gupta from AIDMI Ahmedabad, and all our colleagues who have joined with us in this inaugural program today, along with distinguished delegates and participants who have also joined the program today. We are likely to join with few more experts, including Mr. Hari from GHI. And this particular program is actually designed specifically to meet the edges of both the technology, science, engineering, and society together through NIDM, which is a nodal institution for training and capacity enhancement on disaster risk reduction and resilience as per Disaster Management Act 2005. So we are looking forward because IIT Roorkee has not only good capacity in terms of its achievements in developments of earthquake resistant designs, plans and constructions, but also they have done good works in terms of efforts towards early warning on earthquakes and monitoring of earthquakes. I remember long back since early 1990s, and even before that, the first earthquake that I actually experienced and worked upon was the Uttarkashi earthquake that happened in the early morning on 20th October 1991. And I remember we had the seismographs at our earth science department, and in the early morning we got a call from Uttarkashi that earthquake has happened, and what is the magnitude and what actually are the other parameters. So these informations are very important. In fact, we are all talking about earthquakes, and we often talk about safety from earthquakes or earthquake resistant design and construction. But if you talk technically, it will not be complete to say just earthquake. Earthquake of what magnitude, depth, and duration, that is equally important. And without that, we cannot address the issues. And particularly in engineering, we always talk about peak ground accelerations. And these accelerations are actually the main component in generating the forces which will actually displace or distort or deform the buildings, and therefore cause the adverse consequences in terms of damages to the various elements of the building or the collapse of those buildings. So we will be talking about all these issues, and further to this, there are different type of construction. Most of our constructions in our society are mostly unengineered construction, or we say non-engineered construction, except the ones where the governmental interventions are there or a primary requirement of an engineering design is must. We are going by non-engineered constructions. So we need both guidance for earthquake resistance in terms of non-engineered building as well as engineered building or structures. Now, the other issue is that there are already existing building, and more than 90% of the building lots is actually existing buildings, and the new buildings are also coming up, no doubt. And but how do there are two ways to think about how do the new constructions should take into account the earthquake or seismically resistant designs and considerations, plus what should we do with the existing buildings which may be vulnerable to the impacts of the earthquake and are likely to get affected once an earthquake happens. The examples have been cited by my colleague Mr. Anil Kathat of the Caribbean earthquake, and several other earthquakes also struck our country. I remember since that 1991 earthquake, almost on average, every 2 years, we had been facing one or the other earthquake. Immediately after 91, I remember 1993, Latur earthquake took place. And while in Uttarkashi, we lost around 760 lives, but in Latur, we lost around more than 9,500 lives, or almost 10,000 lives. And this was one of the areas which were where the earthquakes of that kind was not expected. And then we had 95 in Himachal, Madhya area earthquake, then 97 Jabalpur earthquake, 99 we had again in Chamoli in Uttarakhand. I remember 29th March when this earthquake took place, and our team again from Roorkee went to those areas. And initially in Uttarkashi earthquake also we focused on critical buildings, particularly the educational and the health buildings. And slowly we took up the other type of buildings as well. And then 2001, Gujarat earthquake, we are involved with the AIDMI. I remember 26 January at around 8:45 a.m. when parade was going on. When this earthquake struck the buildings, and many casualties did happen. And this was one of the major earthquakes that actually shaken and awakened our governments, and a lot of new attempts were initiated. In fact, subsequent to this earthquake, the Gujarat state initiated the establishment of Gujarat State Disaster Management Authority, as well as they started working on Gujarat State Disaster Management Act, as well as Gujarat State Disaster Management Policy, which were in fact done even before the National Disaster Management Act was notified by Government of India. And subsequently, you may remember earthquake that happened in Indian Ocean, affecting more than almost 24 of the countries. On 26th of December 2004, and it resulted into a tsunami, which led to several other kind of problems, and led to loss of lakhs of life around the Indian Ocean. And then we had earthquake in 2006 and 2008 in Kashmir, and then 2011, I remember 18th September, this was the month, when we had a major earthquake in Sikkim, and that earthquake was felt even at Delhi. I remember it was a Sunday evening at around 6 p.m., not the exact time, but that was time approximately, when I felt a shaking while I was working on my computer at my home in Delhi. And that's a kind of shaking it can generate, which can travel from Sikkim to Delhi, and can be felt by people so far away. So earthquakes have been actually shaking our earth times and again, and this is a natural geodynamic process. As we always talk about plate tectonics, and earthquakes getting generated because of plate movements, which are of 3 different types. We could talk about convergent, divergent, and transform plate margins. But besides that, there are no intraplate earthquakes. Besides the interplate earthquakes are generated because of the thrust and force, and particularly the Himalayan region, which is cut across by several faults transversely. And no, the Himalayas are almost about 2,400 kilometer in length and width. If you take, it varies from 250 kilometer to 400 kilometer. And we have right from the frontal part as main frontal thrust, then main boundary thrust, then main central thrust, and then Indus suture zone and plate margins. So all these areas are actually weak areas along which the movements within the lithospheric upper crustal region can take place, and then cause major earthquakes. Although we are fortunate in our area, particularly, we don't have earthquakes that are normally getting induced because of volcanic or subigneous activities. But we have all other earthquakes compared to the other parts of the world. And circum-Pacific regions had more than 80 to 85% of the earthquakes, while Himalaya is the next to that. So we are very much susceptible to earthquakes of various magnitudes. And we have different seismic gaps also being identified by our scientists. So which are likely and probable areas of high magnitude earthquakes. So therefore, we need to actually awaken and prepare our communities, our administration and governance, as well as our technologists and engineers, architects and masons, in actually working against the impacts of the earthquakes. We cannot actually prevent the earthquakes to happen, like several other disasters. And we may not be able to even predict it temporally well. But we know why do these earthquakes happen, where do these happen, and why do they cause these kind of consequences. And no doubt, the vibrations of the earthquakes may not kill people, but the buildings that kill the people, which get collapsed due to the impacts of these vibrations, which are caused by these earthquakes. So we have to look into these parameters that we actually we got a lot of lessons in past events. I'll talk to you about back to 1991. Only earthquakes have been written. Back during British periods, even in India, to earthquakes that happened in 1893 or 1950, Assam earthquake. So which happened on 15th August. So many earthquakes, and even 1803 Gopal earthquake. So volumes of matter, scientific matter, but we need to actually prepare our manuals and guidance for the common people to learn to know their or retrofit or re-strengthen their buildings for earthquake resistance and safety and precautions against this earthquake event. The second part of it is how to act, what to do and what not to do during an earthquake. All these are things, and our deliberations today will cover all structural, non-structural mechanisms, and I hope there will be some key takeaways, and I wish our experts all the best for the program. And I would like to thank NIDM for providing us this opportunity to cover this program, and also to my good friend for collaborating with us in this effort, and to our experts, Mohammed ji and Hari Kumar ji, others who will be speaking this occasion. So thank you very much, and last but not the least, thanks to the participants for joining with us in this program. And I would ask kindly and questions, and also disseminate the knowledge, information, experiences, or ideas that through this program to all of us around you. So until unless all are safe, we are not safe. So if all are safe, we are safe. If I am safe, all others cannot safe. So by this principle of inclusive approach and based approach. Thank you very much, Anilji. Back to you.
Thank you very much, sir, for enriching the knowledge of our participant by sharing your past knowledge and setting the context of this webinar. Thank you very much, sir. So that's all for our inaugural session, and I thanks both dignitaries for sparing their valuable time and enlightening us with their respective expertise. So moving to technical session, as I already shared that we are joined by two eminent speakers, but before I request them to take on stage, participants are requested to actively take part in the technical session by raising queries, relevant queries to the theme of the webinar, and whatever the doubts you have, please do clear them from our speakers. So first speaker of the technical session is Dr. Mahua Mukherjee. Ma'am is professor in the Department of Architecture and Planning in IIT Roorkee, and ma'am will be enlightening us on the techniques for earthquake resistant sustainable development. So with these words, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Anil. If you can allow me to share, yeah, thanks.
Yeah, ma'am,
First,
you are.
I'd like to thank Anil, Mr. Gupta, and Professor Surya Prakash to bring us to this particular context to be why we should be seriously discussing this issue, because this is also part of our preparedness. So really thank you to bring the context so very relevant, and I hope that we can really add value to your initiative. I hope you can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Yeah, so as already told by Anil, I will be discussing on techniques for earthquake resistant sustainable development. I come from Department of Architecture Planning of IIT Roorkee. I'm also a joint faculty of Center of Excellence in Disaster Mitigation and Management, which is very unique, where many departments from the campus, they come together and we get opportunity to understand the risk in a more holistic way. I'm also Secretary General at present for the South Asia Alliance of Disaster Resilience Institutes and EPISTAG and the GADRI board member. These are also part of capacity building, so I felt like explaining. So first of all, when we have already heard Anil, Kshitij, Surya Prakash sir, we understand that probably the best thing to do for earthquake resistant sustainable development is to say no to construction and building. But probably at this particular time, we don't have that option. So we have to say probably yes to construction and building. But I think in between this no and yes, some of us can make certain changes. We can again look back and we can try to minimize. If we are doing some excess construction, we can really say no to that. And if we do it, if we go for yes, it is high time now to go for build better. We don't have any such luxury not to do it. And as Surya Prakash ji also mentioned, Mr. Gupta also mentioned about heritage structures and many other existing buildings. Build back better is also very, very relevant option. So whether we go for new construction, whether we try to look at our own heritage or existing building stock, everywhere resilience should be the key word for sustainable development. With this, I would like to come to one particular example. This is from Chile earthquake. I think many of you who are in this field, you know it, but somehow it really attracted my attention for this particular conversation. Chile earthquake happened in 2010. It's one of the very large earthquake, great earthquake, 8.8 magnitude. And this is that epicenter, and the entire Chile was actually having some under its influence. And it was not only a very high, heavy, great earthquake, it was also followed by tsunami. And certain areas like these cities, they also experienced 15-meter high water level, which we have often heard about the Sendai earthquake followed by that tsunami. So in this particular case, all of us, we just need to remember that Chile actually is on this ring of fire, and they continuously throughout their settlement history, they have experienced this earthquake. So the society is quite prepared and quite updated. Why this particular earthquake is so very important for us to discuss? Because it happened in a particular area where lots of cities and including mega city like Santiago was affected. And you can see this influence lines, very strong influence within this area. From this to this, it's a medium, and from this line to the green line is the light. So this was not only a 8.8 magnitude earthquake, it happened in a particular country which is highly urbanized, lots of population and lots of assets. And this particular earthquake was also one of the longest duration, 120 seconds. This actually became a unique chance for the earthquake engineers to go and study, because most of the great earthquakes which happened are of the magnitude of 7.9 or 6.9, something like that, the duration there was much less, much less. And as I told, mega cities were affected, and soil character, it really gave enormous opportunity to learn how the soil character is influencing the damage. So people were really interested and they have made lots of good studies out of it. I will bring some of the experiences learned from that, because that is again, I believe, a very generic in nature to a great extent. This particular earthquake presents numerous lessons for successful earthquake engineering. That is one very assuring information which this particular earthquake presented in front of us. Though it was a very high great magnitude level earthquake, then also damages were very less. Because the society was quite prepared, engineered building followed the code provisions. But at the same time, points out numerous areas that require improvement. And probably this is something which actually makes human society excel. So everywhere people have also tried to understand that why they could have done something better, so that damages could have, residual damage also could have been arrested. Code provision and implementation, that they have really thoroughly checked, that where it has been there in place and how the performance is. Most of the modern buildings after 1950s, whatever building was constructed, following the code provision, proper implementation was there, they performed very well. Including, obviously, they were not designed for tsunami, because tsunami, that particular load is very different. But as far as earthquake goes, it was really performed really well. Old buildings, as I told already, old buildings actually showcased certain, again, the very textbook sort of problems. So they again reconfirm that these are the areas where we have to improve. Kshitij was discussing about this heritage structures. Many heritage structures were being referred, which has actually got damages, and some didn't get damaged because of the less intensity, because they were in greener zone. So what happened? Some people, some of the societies, heritage societies, they actually are not budging into go for this retrofitting. But this particular earthquake also showcased that there is enough opportunity also to bring those retrofitting into proper context and to do it sensitively. The non-structural elements and the secondary structures in the new construction, they were major failure cases. So many buildings which are actually standing tall because there was no structural damage, but inside non-structural elements damages were everywhere. So that is something they said, that code provision is there, but implementation is not. So these are something which is very, I think this is also very common learning probably, which can be applicable for many societies, including us. So I felt to share this with you people. All of us, we also know that in our course also re-entrant stiffness irregularity, vertical geometric irregularity, mass irregularity. Regularly we talk about it. And we need not to be bored with them. We need to really uh, appreciate that we are regularly discussing it, and we are not only stopping at discussion level, we are actually bringing it at the design stage and at the construction stage as well. That is something which is very much needed. Again, very assuring. This particular table shows us for the hill capital cities, so many uh, earthquake sensitive, earthquake related code is being referred in the building bylaws. So I will say this code provision and its implementation, that I take as a first and foremost technique which we should really follow, at least religiously, where our wisdom is more stronger. There we can really do lots of experiments, but again, adhering to the very basic of the nature of the earthquake and its impact on the structure. The second technique I will say I would like to share in front of you, these are the emerging technologies. Kshitij brought that particular aspect of affordable housing. These particular techniques are also having very strong relevance towards the affordable housing and seismic services. I actually picked up those from a long list which BMTPC has actually brought together. And you can see that several techniques, these construction technologies have been identified which are suitable for the seismic zone 5 and up to seismic zone 4 also. There are actually long list. I picked few only so that it doesn't really look like something incomprehensible. This is something which we should really go again and again, try to look at whether something we can pick, something emerging technologies we can pick, and why we should pick. Those reasoning, those logics should also be with us. So you can see up to 6 stories, four stories, 3D volumetric. So many different experiments are continuously going on in the engineering front, so in the construction technology front. So I think this is high time to take a very serious look at what is available and not to repeat those things which are continuously we are repeating this despite knowing that they may not give us the best service. So now the options are there. We should really take advantage of these options. So that I rank as the second technique, available emerging technologies that we should look. Not only this one, this is just a group of one such basket. You are exposed to many such baskets. I mean. One particular one I picked up just to discuss that why we should really pay attention to them. Light gauge steel structure system. This light gauge steel frame, once you go through that particular compendium, you will see 16 such different type of technique under this LGSF has been listed. And that is really, really very encouraging. Why this is so very interesting? Because you can carry it even after this any earthquake event. If you have to go for rapid reconstruction, then also you can think about it. What is the basic tenet of this particular basket? High strength to weight ratio. As their weight is less in comparison to their strength, so that itself gives you a very strong benefit. The other benefit is the structure mass is less, so obviously the design earthquake force will be less. So that way also it provides you the economy, and chance of progressive collapse is actually being attested because of the ductility and very strong closely spaced studs and joists. So sharing of loading is happening in any given moment. So this is one such under from that basket, sub basket you can say, I picked up, that is LGSF structure with the ICF insulation for this concrete forms, that is there. And where what is happening, you can see in situ, you are getting all these industrialized pieces, and then in situ you are having that infill wall being completed. So it's a composite, and it's a very quickly done. Within a month, you can complete a 4-story structure, and that is the benefit. Suitable for G+3. If you would like to go for high, taller structure, then you are being suggested by the technical evaluation committee to go for steel frame, and paneling should be done everything. If you are taking it from a particular company where everything has been already checked, then you are not really required to do the checking. Otherwise, you should go for the quality check. Next thing which I would like to bring, I come from architecture planning, so you can always understand that architects never agreed to go for that very stereotype box solution which always come from the structural engineer as the best solution for the most of the average cases. And we always try to break that particular barrier of thinking within that box. So glass in construction, that is something which I would like to discuss with you, and I will bring maybe 1 or 2 techniques associated with this. So glass in construction, we have seen that wonderfully glass has been utilized, not only for the very large windows in the shopping malls, but also for this type of structures. It's at 100 plus floor, where these are jutted out in the Chicago Tower. Now, I would like to bring this particular point as a technique, that understanding any material. For this particular case, I am bringing glass in front of you. Any material you are interested to work with, the third technique I would like to bring in front of you, that is understanding that material, its vulnerability, its limitation, its challenge, which the group of people, structural engineer, material scientists, architects, they need to understand and overcome. For glass, the issue is the glass system, how it will perform and respond to the interstory drift, because racking type of earthquake induced building deflections are going to happen whenever any earthquake is happening. So how it is taking care of that, and how the glass performs after cracking. That means once the failure has happened, then also how they are performing, how they are coming down. That also is a concern, because glass is, if it is coming as a very sharp edge shards, then it can kill people also. So secondary cascading damage will be there. So we need to really take care of this when we discuss about the glass. I first, a very brief introduction of the glass as a material. All of us, I know that we know it, float glass. To a certain extent, the float glass is getting treated, heat treated, from anneal glass to heat strengthened, and fully tempered is when you bring the temperature very high to attain the strength. The tensile strength of the fully tempered glass is 3 times than the anneal glass. So for that, you are going for the heat treatment. And for another type of glass, repeatedly you will be hearing this particular laminated glass as the seismic glass, because this is the best glass which has performed as per the satisfaction. So many a times we call it the seismic glass. What happens? You are having one interlayer, it's a lamination. The lamination can be of the anneal glass, 2 lights of anneal glass. In between we have the interlayer, and or you can have the heat strength, then you can have the fully tempered also. But fully tempered glass, when we have that interlayer and when the shaking happens, fully tempered glass, the advantage is it is when it is broken, comes down as a small pieces. So in case of any earthquake, when the fully tempered glass, which has used in the laminated glazing, is being cracked, the pieces are coming down, only that interlayer is there. So then it becomes a very, very serious issue of maintaining the wealth inside that shop. Because after any such cases, throughout the world, the examples are there that we see lots of um, theft, burglary, those are happening. So these are the other cases. So in the glass, light transmission, heat control, and safety issues, they are being regularly researched. But in the safety issues, other than the fire safety, we really need to pay our attention to this earthquake safety. So here already I have discussed that the glass is a brittle material, it cracks very easily and gets dislodged. So laminated glass is being suggested. Polyvinyl butyl is the interlayer uh, which is taking the two different layers from both the sides, and it can take care of the seismic risk and increase the protection from the burglary and vandalism. And there is also the suggestion from the FEMA. It is the suggestion from FEMA only that emergency exits, entries, near to that, above that, you should not go for the glazing. If try to avoid that if that is having a potential to earthquake shaking. Now let me come to the next set of things. Let's say check that how that vulnerability aspect has been checked in these type of cases. This comes from this Chile earthquake, where you can see that both the sides, they are the new buildings, but we can see the damages. So it has been analyzed that why the building has damaged, the building itself got damaged, and we can also see the glazing has come out, and building has damaged because of shear wall, because of asymmetric architectural configurations. I think again and again these are being taught in our UG classes also now. So when we try to understand this, how the glass system performs and try to take the interstory drift, or after cracking how they are going to perform, we cannot forget that in the inter building, first we have to understand how the building inter system is having an interaction with the glazing system. So that is very important to understand. And these are the, again, from the same earthquake, from the same country, from Concepcion, there is another city. From there, we can see an intact building, which is having enough glazing, but it's a fully intact building. But all around it, this particular school building, there are lots of damaged building. So some important learning from this particular earthquake, and I believe from many other earthquakes, the thing has happened like that flexible or rigid frame, that is strategized displacement, that what displacement you would like to allow, that has to be strategically decided. Wall to building connection, so that interstory drift is being taken care without damage to glass systems or loss of serviceability, because once your building is damaged many times, it cannot render service. Second thing is from first is the holistic to the wall element, building to the wall, then the glass to the frame. And then how the glass is being actually taking seismic glass. We already discussed its performance. Otherwise, its performance we have seen in other cases is not that good. Bottom and side blocking, how it has been done, and silicone. Everywhere we have seen the material which can really absorb and can allow some flexibility to the glazing unit. That has always been a very good sealing element. So with this, we can understand that when we go for this particular material, once we understand the material, that how the material and its assembly works, that is the technique 3. In the technique 4, we would like to bring this advancement. People, once they understood that, okay, the glass as a material, glass as an assembly, whatever its limitation is understood, and in many cases that can be overcome, then we started spraying our wings. And we see these type of surfaces quite often these days. Here, the bracing system is gone. There is, you can see only this spider connectors, those pins are actually taking care of these entire huge pieces of this. So huge cutting glass, this is a beautiful structure also. This entire column, there is a deep beam. From this deep beam, these fins are actually hanging. So the fourth technique I would like to bring in front of you, that is the frameless secondary glass system, that is further advancement, where we try to achieve the maximum benefit of glass as a transparent system. But behind that, we have to really remember that there are a lot of steps. Once a step, you can see that experiment, so that this spider connector, which I was showing here, that has gone through so many different type of testing, and then they could actually come back with these slotted holes, and we get this type of wonderful example. And this is something, the soft facilities Kshitij was mentioning. I would like to say this type of testing facilities from the private sector, reliable testing facilities should come up, so that the structural engineers who are interested to do the testing, who are interested to really spread their wings, they should get that chance. So that is, these soft infrastructures are important for this type of strategies or techniques. So this technique 4, very quickly, let me go through this, that they actually need very wonderful detailing. Here the pin is, this particular fin is actually pinned at the ceiling. And here you can see at the foundation, it has been properly pinned. You just see these fins, how they are connected with each other. So these friction clamps, many different type of clamps comes. Always it has been said that God lies in detailing. And this is so very true for this particular technique, that we have to understand how to keep on improving our detailing. And the last technique I would like to discuss with you people, that is this fifth one. And for this, I would like to take maybe another 2-3 minutes more. This is one particular, both are Apple stores. This is in New York and this is in Palo Alto, California. Here, the earthquake, right now they are not following the seismic zone, but if what they used to follow previously, according to that, it is a very low seismically active zone. In 10,000 years, only 4 great earthquakes may happen here, 4 to 6. Whereas here in California, in 10,000 years, 250 plus great earthquakes may happen, and that too of higher magnitudes. So you can easily imagine that when the designers are designing, here the clear glass box with also lovely ceiling. I think you can see that roof, fully transparent roof, but here the approach is different. So I would like to bring this as a technique, and probably this is the most important technique which I always advocate, the designing technique. You have to design, many information will come to you. Whenever you are actually serving as an architect or an engineer, your design should really bring that robustness of innovative ideas, as well as the safety, security, functionality, and the very basic of aesthetically pleasing. So in this particular case, technique for, you can see that in the previous case, in the New York, we have seen that cube full of glass. But in this particular California case, we saw that glass roof is there, and the glass facade is there, this curtain glazing, but in 2 different spaces. In the front, this glazing is there, glazing facade, but the glazed roof is there on the back space. So very meticulously, the space has been designed in two different strategies. It has not been combined like New York. And the same thing we find that when Apple Store has designed in Tokyo, the very similar strategy, design strategy has been taken. That the fins, this long fins, all these things are taking care of the earthquake shaking. But no daring challenge also to include the glass roof. That has been again compartmentalized and used in the next phase. So this is the last strategy I would like to really bring in front of you. So from my side, I would like to conclude it like this. Seismic performance, that seismic zone and understanding hazard type, intensity, frequency, they are so very basic. We have to first do that. Low seismic mass and strength to weight ratio, so that significantly you can reduce the design earthquake force. Rigidity versus flexibility. No one thing is best. You have to really design according to your need. Element to whole structure, connectivity, drift accommodation, those should be part and parcel of your stages. Continued load carrying path, that is so very basic. Redundancy, damper, distributed energy dissipation, many things you have already learned, keep on hearing, those should be in place, and strategic decisions. And in today's discussion, I brought these 5 techniques: code provision and implementation. I again stress on the term implementation. Second thing, selecting appropriate technologies. Third thing, understanding the limitation. And when, sorry, I'm coming back to number 2, when you go for the appropriate technologies, you should always look at the emerging technologies as well. The third thing is understanding limitation of the material, technique, what you are using, robust detailing, and contextual design decision. With this, I would like to say thanks, and I would like to, before I conclude, I would like to acknowledge my gratitude to Dr. Surya Prakash and NIDM to invite me for this opportunity. Mr. Aditya Rahul, Mr. Ganeshan, and Mr. Avinay Kumar from my lab for helping me in preparing it. And I saw several questions there. I would like to come back there.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for your deliberation on techniques for earthquake-resistant sustainable development. And indeed, we cannot stop earthquakes. Neither development can be avoided, but therefore, we need to enhance the resilience of our infrastructure as encouraged by all the major frameworks of DRR, like, for example, Target 4 of Sendai framework, exhorted to reduce disaster damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of basic services. And similarly, the Prime Minister 10-point agenda on DRR also highlighted the need to mainstream the DRR in every development activities. So thank you very much, ma'am, for providing insight on various techniques that will facilitate for earthquake resistant and sustainable development. Ma'am, as you said, there are few questions. I will be taking one by one.
Do I have time, Anil?
Yes, ma'am. There are 3 questions.
I would like to take at least one question. Yeah, I think I got a particular question from Mr. Manu. I would like to really go back because this particular question is very close to my heart also. Because here the question is about the sustainability. I would like to come back to my first slide. And I would like to tell you that if we don't do anything, do any intervention, we don't go for any construction, any building, that is the best thing what we can do for the earth. But we don't do it. So whether a glass structure is actually can be compared with the failing of trees or not, no, I'm not going into that debate at all, because that is not probably the debate. All of us, we know the glass is actually going to have lots of, it's a very, very, I will say, green technique, but it may not be the sustainable technique. So there are lots of debates into these type of materials, but what I would like to show is that with our aspirations, we should not really compromise with the safety aspects. So if you are having that aspiration to go with uh, glass, there are a lot of good detailing. What is happening in India, every time we go back and we try to have a very jugaad kind of details. But what I am trying to bring here, if you are serious about safety issues, whatever material you select, and you don't really try to tell me that Adobe structure, which has failed over and over, you will only try to advocate that without paying attention to the improvement of its performance when you are using it in a seismically active zones. So that was primarily my view. So I don't know whether I could actually answer your queries because both the questions is of similar nature. So
Yes, ma'am.
thank you.
The question from Prachi Umrao is also having same meaning as that of Mr. Mani. So thank you very much, ma'am, for answering the queries. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
For second talk, I hand over the mic to Dr. Hari Kumar. He is coordinator in Geohazard International, and sir will be discussing the opportunities we have to strengthen the earthquake risk mitigation. So with these words, I hand over the stage to you, sir.
Thank you.
Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, sir. You are audible.
I cannot share right now.
Give me a minute, sir.
Yes. Wonderful listening to
Now
Dr.
you
Mahua.
can share.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It was wonderful listening to Dr. Mahua, and I completely agree with what ma'am was just mentioning, that, sustainability is really, really important, but aspirations are also very, very important. Aspirations of the people. I was very much involved in the reconstruction part of the after the Orissa cyclone and the Gujarat earthquake, and in both these places, when we were we were promoting what they were already using, I mean, which was very eco-friendly materials, Adobe and materials like that. But their aspiration is to have a concrete roof above their health. That is the aspiration of the people. We cannot deny that. So, the promotion that I was part of the UN then, and the promotion at that point of time was disaster resistant but sustainable design and construction technologies. And that is, we have to bring a marriage of the two, the aspirations of the people, ensuring that safety is assured, but at the same time causing as minimum impact on the environment as possible. So thank you so much, Mahua ma'am, for bringing out those aspects. I will just quickly share my screen here on talking about earthquake risk mitigation. Hope you can see this. So as Dr. Anil mentioned, I work for Geohazards International. It's an organization based in Delhi, and we have been working with various national and state governments on earthquake risk mitigation. That's what we started with, but now we are working on almost all hazards around, because India is multi-hazard prone. And this is a peek into our website. We focus a lot on the safety of hospitals. Surya sir was mentioning about the critical infrastructure, and that is something which we work a lot on the assessment and also on the preparedness of hospitals and schools as well. So let us get into, we don't have to go into details about our Earth, and we know where the problem is. We have one small piece, the Indian plate is one small piece in the jigsaw puzzle of our Earth, and that is actually pushing against the the Eurasian plate, which actually created the Himalayas, and this movement and the several intraplate faults, which Surya sir was again alluding to, are the ones which are creating earthquakes in our country. We have had our share of large and very large earthquakes. The plate boundary, the black line you can see, has been home to several earthquakes. Right at the top is the Kashmir earthquake, 1905. Next one is the 1905 Kangra earthquake. Come along the plate boundary, you come to the 2015 Nepal earthquake, then 1934 Bihar Nepal earthquake, 1897 Shillong earthquake, 1950 the Arunachal Pradesh China border earthquake, and you come down, then 1941 Andaman Nicobar Island earthquake, and 2004 tsunami generating earthquake. So this plate boundary is really, really active. And where there has been an earthquake, some pressure is released, and where there has not been an earthquake, things look pretty, as if, like Kshitij mentioned, we are waiting for a big one. And there are a few gaps in these seismic tectonic boundary. You can see between the Kangra earthquake and the Nepal earthquake, that part of the plate boundary has not produced a major earthquake. I'm not talking about a Chamoli earthquake or Uttarkashi earthquake kind of event. We're talking about a big event which has not happened for at least 300, 400 years. So scientists worry about these locations where there are seismic gaps. The further away they say that the further away you are from the last earthquake, they say that you are always in between two earthquakes in time. The further away you are from the last one, the closer you are to the next one. And so it's it's only in preparedness and mitigation that we can actually try and save our fellow citizens. The seismic zoning map of India, BMTPC, the map has been alluded to several times in our earlier presentations. We have 4 zones. Low risk areas, zone 2, zone 3 moderate, and 4 high and very high. So there are lots of red and deep orange places in our map, which are showing areas where the seismic hazard is high or very high. And it's no surprise that they coincide along with the Himalayas. So it's not just overlap of the seismic hazard with the mountains. It's also an overlap of the seismic hazard with the landslide hazard. So earthquakes can trigger landslides, and the effects of which we are seeing now. I mean, the landslides we are seeing of late in this monsoon period. I think Uttarakhand and Himachal had so many landslides. We are seeing videos of. These are monsoon, precipitation-induced landslides. But these very landslides can be triggered if there is an earthquake as well. A strong earthquake will trigger a lot of landslides. And when we look at these landslides, which are seeing the videos of, these are one event. But when a large earthquake shakes the mountains, it's going to be landslides everywhere. And that is something we really have to think about when we are thinking about earthquake risk mitigation. We are also thinking about, especially in the hill towns, which are really growing as far as our country is concerned. The hill towns are growing rapidly, and we are adding to the risk in many of these hill towns. The earthquake zoning map of a few states are here. Gujarat has 2, 3, 4, and 5. We have Maharashtra also has 4, basically due to the Koyna earthquake and the Latur earthquake. We have seismic zone 2, 3, and 4 there. And the hills, mostly seismic zone 4 and 5. So you can see the faults that are passing through the states of J&K, Himachal, Punjab, Chandigarh, Uttarakhand, and the faults that are around the northeast of India. These have produced several large earthquakes. They have been, and it's very, very important to learn from these events, to learn from what has happened before, because there's an old saying which says that lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. And now we know that that is wrong. Like, I mean, if a place is prone to lightning, it can get struck again. And similarly with earthquakes, if it has happened once, it can happen again. So looking at previous earthquake, 1869, there was a 7.4 in the Kachar Manipur region. 1897 Shillong earthquake, one of the strongest intensity shakings felt in the subcontinent and across the world actually. 1918, the Sri Mangal earthquake, this happened in Bangladesh. But earthquakes have no boundaries. It can happen in Bangladesh, and it can cause a lot of destruction in our country. It can happen in Bhutan or in Nepal and cause a lot of destruction in our country, and vice versa. The earthquakes have no borders, so it's very important for us to understand what all can happen. The 8.6, the last big earthquake which happened in the northeast is this 8.6 magnitude earthquake in the Arunachal Pradesh China border. And it's really important that we look at how much development has taken place in these places, especially in the hills, since these last big earthquakes have happened. And how much of those are safe? And as Mahua ma'am just mentioned, how much are these built earthquake resistant? And if they are not, the next earthquake is going to find us out. And that is going to, and we have to, when we are building something, we have to understand the hazards. This is a PHC in Sikkim. Surya sir mentioned about this earthquake in September 2011, the Sikkim earthquake of 2011. This is a PHC damage, and you see this PHC was damaged not by the earthquake, it was damaged by rockfall. A rock which was up there on the hills was shaken out during the earthquake, and it fell down and destroyed the PHC. And the one thing I see here, that is one rock which has destroyed the PHC, but the other rock which is very important to me is the old rock which is here. This was always there. Even when we were building this PHC, this rock was already here. The engineers and the people who built this should have wondered, where this rock come from? Are there other rocks up there which can come down during rains or during an earthquake? This is understanding of risk. And everything we build, everything we do has to be considering the risk. And that is what Mahua ma'am showed, a brilliant example of 2 Apple stores. And one has considered, that is the one in Palo Alto considers that earthquakes will happen there. And they are building as per the codal provisions which are required. And that is important, understanding the risk. So earthquake risk mitigation, I would classify into 3 broad areas. One is capacity building. Everyone needs to develop their capacities, and exposure reduction and vulnerability reduction. And in capacity building, I would put understanding risk first. And it's really important to understand what can happen where I am. If I am a district collector taking charge of a new district, I should know what all can happen in my district. That's very important. And that risk has to be clear, and that has to be from a scientific source, not hearsay. We have excellent institutions like IIT Roorkee, IMD. It's very important that this risk information is communicated very clearly to the decision makers. They may not be the scientists, but they need that information. So understanding risk for everyone is very important. Second, learning from past events. I already talked about the previous earthquakes, and it's important to communicate the risk. This is where awareness generation comes in, And we have been doing awareness for many years, and many people now are talking, oh, the time for awareness is over, it is the time for action. But honestly, the time for awareness will never be over. There are new children going to school. should we stop making them aware? Because we have made the 10th standard children aware, or the 7th standard children aware. Should we not continue that awareness generation programs? We have to. You will never be done with awareness generation programs. Very, very important. That is an ongoing activity which will go on forever. And the better information we have, the better we can communicate real scientific information. So communicating the risk, training, very important. Everyone needs their capacities built, be it the district collector to the people working in every department, to the community themselves. They need their capacities built. Preparedness planning, where all do we need preparedness planning? At all levels, right from the national level, state level, district level, right to the family preparedness part. You know, the families also need to have a preparedness plan made. And improving capacities, capacity building is actually something which we will continue to do, and for all hazards. For exposure reduction also we need capacity buildings. We'll see how. And also for vulnerability reduction we need capacity building. And you know, many a time what happens is we do things for the short term. We have to have a long-term vision. We have to think 20 years ahead, 30 years ahead. We cannot, you know, many a time we cannot see beyond our term in office. When my term in office is 5 years, I try to plan for 2 years or 3 years and let's see what happens. No, we have to look at a long-term risk reduction plan. Next is exposure reduction. Exposure reduction is actually trying to reduce the exposure of the community to the risk. And for that, the first important thing is to understand the hazard. And I've been talking a lot about understanding the hazard, understanding the risk, and I think it's one of the key elements. You look at the Sendai framework, this is there. The first statement is understanding risk. Look at the Prime Minister's 10-point agenda, understanding risk will come there. Everywhere, it's very, very important. That is the basics of disaster management. And I think it's very, very important to get good information, scientific information. So understanding hazards, improving our regulations. You know, you do not want our cities to grow into floodplains. You don't want cities to grow into vulnerable hillsides. So regulations are very, very important. Techno-legal regime is really important in reducing the risk. Regulatory capacities. How much capacities are there in our municipalities and municipal corporations and panchayats? Do they have enough capacities? Do they have enough personnel? And are the personnel who are there, do they have enough capacities? That is something to look at, regulatory capacities, and how much of enforcement is happening. We have good building codes. Do those building codes form part of your building bylaws? Because our building codes are not mandatory, they are just recommendatory. They become mandatory only when they find place in the building bylaws. And we have to see if our building bylaws are alluding to the code, and if the panchayats and the municipalities have the capacities to enforce these regulations. We have a lot of risk adding to our growing hill towns. Looking at reduction of vulnerability, again, understanding hazards and the effects on the built environment. What can the effects of the next earthquake be on the city of, say, Shimla or the city of Dehradun? What can the effects be? We have to understand, not just, you know, we cannot just think that, oh, so many people will die. No, we need to understand what will happen to the roads connecting Shimla to the rest of the country, or Gangtok to the rest of the country. We have to understand what will be the effects of the earthquake on the water supply systems. So all of this has to be considered in the vulnerability of the built environment. We need to do a lot of assessment. We have a stock of buildings which are maybe not built as per earthquake resistant standards, because our standards are also improving. Our codes are getting revised. So, you know, a building built in 2000, in the year 2000, will not conform to the codes, because the codes were revised in 2002 and again in 2016. So they won't be compliant to the current codes. So they are actually will be vulnerable. So it's very, very important that we do assessment and retrofitting, making the buildings safer than it actually is now against future earthquakes. And we also have to look at non-structural risk reduction, what happens inside buildings during an earthquake shaking. We'll talk a little bit. I'll spend a few slides on that. And building capacities, for engineers, capacity of engineers, architects, masons, contractors, the everyone involved in the built environment needs their capacity built. Not just them, also students of engineering, architecture. So training is required for building capacities in ensuring that vulnerabilities are reduced. Long-term planning is required here as well, and we need to look at the special problems of hillside constructions. Our codes are very good, but when it comes to hillside constructions, I think it can be a little bit better. And we're looking at non-structural risk reduction with a picture from the Gujarat earthquake shows exactly, the statement that earthquakes don't kill, buildings do. And you see the building in the foreground has actually killed people, but the building at the back, which is actually a CPWD construction, is untouched. That building looks like doesn't even look like an earthquake has happened there. Not even a crack is visible. So it shows that earthquakes will affect buildings, but not all buildings are vulnerable. And it is also not all buildings collapse in earthquakes, and not all earthquakes collapse buildings. Some earthquakes are very small, so they may not collapse buildings. But we should also add that some buildings don't need an earthquake itself to come down. We are seeing building collapses during monsoons, across the country, even without an earthquake. But what happens inside a building during an earthquake is quite interesting. We'll try to see a video from an earthquake in Kobe. This is an earthquake which happened in the 1995, and you can see the objects in the building are moving, shaking so much. The same thing in slow motion. You see, most of the furniture in this television studio was on wheels. So they are just moving around in the earthquake shaking. But if this kind of shaking happens in our office, in our schools, in our hospitals, things are going to fall down, and they are going to cause losses. You can imagine what will happen if this kind of shaking happens in this hospital. You see, this is the entrance to the burn ward, and we have so many oxygen cylinders kept there, all of which are going to fall down and roll around, so people will not be able to evacuate during or just after an earthquake shaking. And hospitals really have to be functional after an earthquake. Even if the building is built earthquake resistant, a hospital building is built earthquake resistant, if all the equipment fall down, that hospital cannot save lives. To the community, they cannot be helpful to the community when the community needs it the most after an earthquake. So non-structural risk reduction is really, really important, that needs to be given importance. In the schools, you can see I was doing an assessment of the school, and I was in ma'am's room, principal ma'am's room, and I was telling ma'am that, ma'am, you have kept those shields at the back. Those are meant for the small earthquakes, and any small earthquakes, they are going to fall down and hurt you. And the big earthquake, the cupboard is also going to come on you. And the big trophy is kept here on the right side. That's probably kept there for falling onto the guests who are sitting facing madam. The short point is that we don't see the hazards. We don't understand the hazards which we are living with every day. Even though we are living, this is from seismic zone 5, even though we live with hazards, we really need to see. Like that stone in the Sikkim, near the Sikkim PHC, like these hazards in the school, and we need to be able to understand and notice what can happen here. That is the first step towards getting yourself prepared. What can happen in this? This is a hospital. and where oxygen lines are going from one building to another, and the lines are actually connected to two buildings. You can see this asbestos roof where the building pipe is connected, and it is also connected to the other building. And what happens during an earthquake shaking is that these buildings are not going to shake the same way. They are going to shake differently. And when they shake differently, the pipes are going to be pulled apart and broken. So you may have your oxygen tanks and all ready, but your supply lines are going to break. So the effects of earthquakes on pipes is especially very, very important, and we need to give it a little bit of flexibility so that it doesn't break. The same thing can happen to water tanks. Water tanks are at the top of buildings, and actually when buildings move, the top portion moves the most, and when water tanks slide or fall down, maybe they slide, the pipe can come off and all the water you have may be lost. And do you expect water supply to remain functional after an earthquake in your city? Very good. If you get it, very good. But whatever you have in the water tank could also be lost because your the pipe was not flexible. It was rigid and it broke. And many a time now we have started taking notice of it. This is from the Bhuj hospital in Gujarat, where the fire line going from one building to another has been given a little bit of flexibility so that even if the buildings shake differently, the fire pipeline is not going to break. It's going to shake, but it's not going to break. So we talked about the dangers of our hill towns. I think it is the multi-hazard profile of our hill towns which are going to really hurt us because they're prone not just to earthquakes. We saw that they are prone to earthquakes, but they are also prone to landslides. They're prone to rock falls, floods, flash floods. What all we are seeing these days. There's also chance of a glacial lake outburst flood. Climate change effects on the Himalayas is very well known. So the hills are in danger of being affected by the next earthquake, and most of them are these towns are earthquake prone. I can name a few like Shimla is foremost in my mind as far as North India is concerned. We also have Gangtok in Sikkim, Shillong, Aizawl. We have so many towns which are growing very, very rapidly, and they're earthquake prone, landslide prone. They have rapidly expanding into the landslide prone areas, more and more expanding into the landslide prone areas, which is why we are seeing these landslides more and more. They have limited response capacities, increasing populations, increasing risk, and limited access. You take the example of Gangtok. Gangtok is connected to the rest of the country by one road. One road. So if that road is affected by landslides, it is affected by earthquake-induced landslides, it's going to take some time before rescue teams can reach Gangtok. It's going to take that long. So we need to consider not just the effect of the earthquake on buildings, but also on the infrastructure. And if you look at the way the towns are growing, this is Aizawl for you. And if there is a centimeter of ground where building has not been built, that is because it is vertical cliff. Otherwise, they have built the entire city has been built like this, such a dense, densely populated city, not just in terms of people, but also in terms of buildings. And you can see, take a close-up, when we look from far, we think these are single-story, two-story buildings. And you can start counting these building floors. They're anything from 8 to 10 floors on each of these buildings. And you can imagine the effects of an earthquake happening here. And the way they built here, I mean, there is hardly any space for them to build. The practice of construction is also very difficult. And actually, when we are talking about far-flung cities like Aizawl and Gangtok, the real problem is not distance, the isolation, but it's also the isolation of technology. They don't have access to the best engineers. There are very good engineers there, but our learning from other parts of the country may not be as much as, say, an engineer in Shimla has access to. And you see the way they are constructing. I was very surprised to see this construction site which was cleared, and this person has cut down the columns, the thin columns of the house above him, and that is lying on the ground. You can see at the bottom, and it's lying there. And I asked the person above, don't you have a problem? Your column has been cut. And he says, no, this is general practice. I also cut the column of the house above my house. So it is okay. Nobody is bothered about these foundations getting damaged. But and once this building is up, nobody will know that the column of the house above was cut. But the earthquake will find out this. These weaknesses will be exposed and will lead to losses and deaths. And like I said, it's not just the buildings, it is also the access routes. We don't want a city to be completely cut off from the rest of the country and unable to, rest of the country will be unable to help. This is from Kinnoor. It says one rockfall is enough. You can imagine how much time it will take to clear this road. And when we talk about roads, it's not just roads. Roads are also parallelly carry water supply lines. They also carry electricity. You can telecommunication, cables, everything comes in the roads. And when you lose roads to an earthquake-induced landslides, it is going to affect not just the road and road communication. It is going to affect electricity. It's going to affect communication. Probably might affect the water supply as well. And loss of a bridge. This is from the rockfall last month, which happened, and a bridge which took a direct hit of a rock. One of the rocks was lost, and you can imagine the communities on the other side are going to be affected. So we are talking about earthquake risk, but earthquakes can induce rockfalls, can induce landslides as well. So problems hill cities will face in a post-earthquake scenario. Communications will be down. Maybe satellite phones will be available with the district collector, but all other communications will probably be down. Electricity will be down. There will be no water. Most of the cities have water because most of these are ridge top cities, but so they don't have gravity-fed water supply systems. Shimla, almost 90% of Shimla's water supply is pumped from rivers far away, 8 kilometers. The pumping, the line goes 8 kilometers up. So when electricity fails, the pumping fails. So when electricity is knocked off, water supply is knocked off as well. And you can imagine a hospital building which has lost electricity, which has lost water as well. How are they going to save lives? We are thinking of the most important hospitals in these cities. It's really, really important they prepare, they understand this scenario and prepare for it. And disaster managers will be spread across the city. Road access within the city will be affected. Outside the city will also be affected. No heavy rescue items will not be available in most of these cities. They have to be brought up. And with the roads gone, that is not going to happen. More people will die because they don't get rescued in time. And this is a reality. More people will be affected because the hospitals cannot save them, because they are affected because the water supply has gone, the power supply has gone. So it's really important for us to understand what all can happen, rather than just believe that it's going to be, oh, some buildings will come down. No, we should understand the scenario of what will happen following an earthquake. Shaking and landslides will damage utilities. When I say utilities, I'm talking about water supply and power and transportation systems and electricity, water supply, roads, communication. These are all interdependent. They're all interdependent. If an electrical transformer has fallen down and is gone, it has to be replaced. And if it has to be replaced, it has to come from some place far away through a road. That road is not there. So that is the interdependence for you. Water supply, I already told you about the interdependence. And remote locations make these systems really, really important. Roads can be affected by landslides. They are a lifeline for emergency services, emergency rescue. You know, a city like Gangtok doesn't have an airport. I mean, a functional airport. They have an airport which is closed temporarily. Right now, they don't have a functional airport. Aizaul's airport is 35 kilometers away. So if the roads are not functional, then how is the rescue going to happen? How is NDRF going to reach? They will really, really have to plan for helicopters to reach there. So that has to be planned in advance and coordinated very well with the disaster management authorities of these places. The system interdependence we already talked about. You know, big water lines can be damaged in the earthquake, and if we understand what can happen, we can take mitigative action. Again, I'm talking about understanding the hazard, understanding the risk. There is a brilliant example from the US in Alaska, the Trans-Alaska oil pipeline. It's not a water supply line, it's a pipeline. And when it is crossing the fault, the USGS, their geological survey, they estimated that there is going to be likely horizontal and vertical movement. And they found out some engineering solutions, and the pipeline is now supported on, it's not rigid, it's not fixed. It is supported on Teflon shoes that are free to slide. They are free to slide 10 meters on either side, or 20 meters on either side, because that is the movement they expect during an earthquake. This is a clear case where the geological survey and the pipeline people have worked together, and the engineers have worked together to find a solution. It is very, very important that our departments also work together. That's something which is very, very important in disaster risk mitigation. It cannot be just, you know, everything cannot be just done by the disaster management. Not everything can be done by the National Disaster Management Authority or NIDM or the State Disaster Management Authority. Every department has a role to play in reducing the risk in our cities. And we need to really study what all can happen. This is one example of a scenario that was developed in Mandi. This was done by NDMA, IIT Bombay, IIT Madras. Luckily, Geohazards Society was also involved. I was lucky to be involved in this study, which found out what can happen in the event of an earthquake striking Mandi and the effects of it. And that led to several changes within the government. And we also did a scenario in Aizaul. The way, you know, the study, it's not very generic exercise. We had several teams working together. A team of experts studying the water supply line to Aizaul, a team of experts studying the roads to Aizaul, trying to find out what will happen in the next earthquake. If a 7 magnitude earthquake strikes Aizaul, what are the effects of it to the water supply line? What are the effects on the water power, on the roads, on the hospitals, to the general people, on the hills? Actually, we found that 1100 landslides will be triggered by earthquakes in dry condition, in 7 magnitude earthquake in Aizaul municipal area, big and small earthquakes. And if it happens during the monsoon, the numbers will probably remain the same, but the sizes of these landslides will vary. And Aizaul is going to be cut off from the rest of the country. And this study led to recommendations and led to a lot of change by the government of Mizoram. Scenarios really help. Creating scenarios really help. They take risk assessments further because they tell the story of what can happen in the next earthquake. It's not a prediction. It is an illustration of what can happen. A study what will happen to your water supply, what will happen to your electricity, and bringing it all together to find out what will happen in your city when such and such a magnitude of earthquake happens. And it can be created for daytime events and as well as nighttime events, because it's going to vary. And sectoral risk assessment break down the risk to manageable principles. So we have some recommendations. Of water supply, you need a second line, and you need to ensure that the water supply line which crosses 3 landslide prone areas take protective action there. So the water supply department knows exactly what is to be done. The electricity people know exactly what is to be done. The hospital knows that they have to store in their premises water supply for 3 days for their for serving the community, and they need to store generator fuel because electricity is going to fail and the hospital has to run for 3 days. They have to store that. They need to protect their critical equipments, all of those. So the risk has been divided into small chunks, and that can be actually with recommendations can be taken towards mitigative actions. And it led to changes in plans in the community in Aizawl. The scenario, they developed ward-wise preparedness. The shelters were designated. Many churches are there. Churches were designated as shelters. They have a good community organization called Young Miso Association. They formed disaster response forces. They understood that water supply will fail, so they encouraged rainwater harvesting. Families started getting prepared themselves. There was a demand from the community, demand for school preparedness and building bylaws. It was easier for the state to enforce building regulations. Also, in the state government, people would take decisions with more knowledge of what the risk is. They started changing their land use. They changed their building regulations. They appointed geologists. Aizawl Municipal Corporation is the only municipality in the country which has appointed geologists. You know, in places like Shimla, in Gangtok, it is engineers who are building, and engineers have limitations. I'm an engineer myself. I need the support of geotechnical engineers, geologists. I need that. But then if they are not present in the municipality, I am handicapped. My design is handicapped. Hospital preparedness was initiated, and they prepared landslide hazard map of 1:5,000 scale, possibly the only city in the country where they have 1:5,000 scale map, because normally we have uh, landslide hazard maps of 1:50,000. Those are not useful for planning purposes. We need good scale maps for planning and enforcement purposes. Risk sensitive planning. Anil has made his appearance, so I will go quickly. How much time do I have, Anil?
Sir, 2 more minutes.
Okay, okay. I don't think I have more than that. I will finish in 2 minutes. Risk sensitive, they started understanding the risk, and their land use planning was changed. They brought in new regulations actually. There was a practice where people would cut the hillsides before the construction, even before they applied for permit, because when you apply for permit, the law says that you have to bring a geologist from the geology department to assess the and get a sign, a geologist sign on the application. But now what people used to do in Aizawl was that they wouldn't apply, they will cut, and there was no law to prevent people from cutting before applying for a construction. But now the Aizawl new regulations, slope modification regulations, which Aizawl has brought in, you cannot cut above a certain volume of soil without getting a permit. So they are regulating, they are actually ensuring that future buildings are compliant, and they have a new regulations which has been passed by the Mizoram government. So, and this is the landslide hazard map. Normally, a landslide map of a city is in one page. Here, the Aizawl's map has 134 pages. That's a city because it is a 1:5,000 scale, and that is very good for regulations. And it needed, like I mentioned before, it needed people to come together, everyone to come together. Normally what happens is the engineering department doesn't talk to the architects, they don't talk to the geologists, they don't talk to the roads people. We need everyone to work together. So that is what, when we worked in ISOL, we brought everyone together into a landslide policy committee. There were community representatives, landslide geologists, disaster manager, public policy specialists, structural engineers, geophysicists. Everyone had to come together and work together. And it was very interesting to see that many of them, in spite of living in the same city, had never worked together. Disaster management cannot be achieved by one department alone. It is a collective effort. Everyone has to work together. We have to break our silos and start working together. So I'm re-looking at the earthquake risk mitigation. I don't have the time, but words which appear again and again is understanding risk, learning from the past events, understanding the effects of future hazards on the built environment, non-structural risk reduction, retrofitting, better regulations, capacities in our municipalities and municipal corporations. Those are the things which we can, that is the way ahead for us to reduce risk. Policies, programs, projects and events in disaster management can be, we cannot just do, okay, let me do a mason training program, let me do an engineer's training program. They have to fit into a long-term plan, a 20-year plan to reduce risk. That is required. And that should be followed by an evaluation. Like we are following this Sendai framework, and every 5 years we are evaluating how much did we progress, do we need to make corrections. That is important. Us to develop a long-term risk mitigation plan and use it to systematically reduce the risk without adding new risk, and will help our hill towns to become safer. I'm one of my favorite documents was the Ministry of Home Affairs document, which was released, a status report of disaster management released in August 2004, just a couple of months before the tsunami hit us, and about 5 months before the Disaster Management Act was passed. And a paragraph talks about a Vision 2020. It says, our Vision 2020 is to build a safer and secure India through sustained collective effort, synergy of the national capacities and people's participation. What looks like a dream today will be transformed into reality over the next 2 decades. This is our goal, and we shall strive to achieve this with a missionary zeal. This is a Ministry of Home Affairs document, and I just love the vision with which it was written. The path ahead, which looks difficult today, will be a lot easier as we move along together. Again, collective effort, everyone needs to come together. Have we achieved everything which we thought we could achieve in 2004? I do not know, but we have come a long way. We have achieved a lot, and we are well on our way. But we need to have these long-term visions. That is really, really important. That is what can save us. So thank you so much, NIDM, and especially because Surya sir talked about in the Hill Cities division. Thank you so much, towards safer hill communities. Thank
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful deliberation on earthquake risk mitigation. Surely we need to be prepared, and for this, the first step is to understanding the risk. We should be aware of our exposure to the degree of vulnerability, and as well as our capacity to deal with the impending risk. And subsequently, we need to strengthen our policies, our regulation beside the capacities of our communities and the relevant stakeholders to enhance our resilience against a disaster like earthquakes. And another important takeaway of the talk was that we need to adopt a multi-hazard approach. For focusing on only one hazard will not fulfill our strategies for a resilient India. So thank you very much, sir. Sir, there are a couple of questions. Mr. Chauhan Hitesh Kumar question is, do climate change has any role in earthquake? And another question is from Mr. Ajit VM. His question is there any method to early detection of earthquake?
Both I should like to say no, because I mean the two activities, climate change is an ongoing phenomena, and it is getting more and more understood now. But tectonic activities, you know, how much they are triggered by climate change is not, I would say, not much. But an earthquake can actually, you know, the rebuilding, all the debris disposal, all is going to affect, you know, our environment and create, will all the rebuilding will actually will have the opposite effect. The earthquake and the post-earthquake construction will have a definite effect on the climate. Earthquake prediction, so far not possible. We get a few seconds of warning, because earthquakes actually, when this is about the signs of the earthquake, when and a fault breaks, two types of waves emanate from the source, and one is the primary waves, which is the faster wave but the less damaging wave. So we feel the primary wave first, and the secondary wave, which is the more damaging wave, comes later because of the difference in speed between these two waves. It's like lightning and thunder. You see lightning first, and then you hear the thunder. So primary waves are not damaging. So depending on the source of the earthquake, you will get a few seconds of warning. Other than that, we have not been able to predict earthquakes. But I must say that you know, our seismic zoning map is a prediction. It tells you, you know, where the big earthquakes can happen, and how big those earthquakes can be is also said in the seismic zoning map. It tells you the intensity of the map. It only doesn't give you a date when the earthquake happens, but it tells you actually where it will happen and how big it can be. So that is as much prediction as it is possible right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for answering the queries. That's all for the question and answer session. Once again, thank you very much for joining us, enlightening us and our participants.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
So that's all for the technical session. Heading towards validation. Now I request Mr. Kshitij Gupta from AIDMI for sharing his concluding remarks on the webinar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anilji. Thank you so much. What can I say that has not been said by our technical experts? Um, my knowledge, my experience, and my expertise is actually quite dwarfed when it comes to saying anything in front of Hari Kumarji and Dr. Mahua Mukherjee. So I would first of all like to thank both of you for your wonderful presentations. Uh, it seems that we actually do learn something new every day. Having worked for almost a decade in the field of disaster risk reduction, I thought I knew, if not everything, then mostly everything about earthquake risk mitigation that should be known. But today's presentation has taught me so many new things. During Mawaji's presentation, I came to know how different materials can be used. I mean, the mention of light gauze steel frame, that was something very interesting. Coming from a non-architectural, non-civil engineering background, DRR practitioner like me, we can take all these findings and go forward in a very sustainable way. So that was a very good learning from ma'am's presentation, and the way you made the comparison between the two Apple stores in Palo Alto and the other one in New York, basically rooting the experience of design into uh, the landscape and the vulnerability of the landscape to different kind of hazards. I think that kind of integrated thinking that cuts across different kinds of disciplines of engineering, architecture, geology, and urban planning is needed. And Dr. Hari Kumar's session was, as usual, so enlightening in so many respects. I mean, Sir touched upon so many things and the need for integration, and why do we need to have a deeper, why do we need to take a deeper dive into the issue of earthquake risk mitigation? While we may think that earthquakes cause deaths and destruction, we also need to understand what kind of destruction would be had. And in that respect, when you made the point of how critical supplies like water supply, electricity supply, and critical infrastructure like hospitals and schools can be affected after an earthquake. So that is a very important point. And to add to what you were saying, sir, you would like basically touched upon each and everything that is to be said about earthquake risk mitigation here in India. Just to add to what you were saying, I would also like to add that there is also this perspective emerging that mostly, just as you cited the example of like Sikkim, where like just one road leads to that city, and if that were to be disrupted by a landslide caused by an earthquake, like the life for the citizens of that place would become so difficult because life assisting assistance would reach to them very late. So similarly, we also need to think about how does our rural and urban connectivity can be made disaster resilient. And just as you said, roads are just not an infrastructure that transports people and vehicles from one part to another. It is also uh, a structure which has power cables, water supply, and all the other sewage systems also running through them. So we need to understand these connections and make these connections very well. And finally, I think I've like spoken more than the time allotted to me. Sorry, NLG. Just one last point that I would like to make is that all webinars like these are very important for the simple reason that there is a wealth of knowledge. And if Mauaji's and Hari Kumarji's presentation has showed us anything, that there is a wealth of knowledge that exists in our country on taking the right kind of action. And it is very important to share this knowledge with everybody. So I thank NIDM again for organizing this. I thank both the esteemed presenters, Dr. Hari Kumar ji, Dr. Mahua Mukherjee, and also give my thanks to Dr. Surya Prakash for organizing this, and also Anil ji and his team. I'm sure you guys must have worked very hard behind the scenes, and hope that many such collaborations can also happen in future. We at AIDMI are very excited to partner with GeoHazards, IIT Roorkee, and NIDM to take on any such work in future. So thank you very much, and may God bless us all and keep you safe.
Thank you very much, sir, for sharing your remarks. Now, for concluding address of today's webinar, I pass on the stage to Professor Surya Prakash at GEMA Division NITM. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Anilji. First of all, I would like to express my heartfelt, sincere thanks to my good friends, Professor Mahua and Hari Kumarji, who had always been supporting us in many of our activities, and we are very pleased to see them working very hard and sharing their acquired knowledge with the concerned stakeholders so that they can utilize it and can apply them in their practices. This is very good. But whatever our experts have spoken, I just like to add few more points for concern to the people who can make decisions or who can actually contribute to our societal benefits in terms of disaster risk reduction and resilience. The things that I learned from not only from India but from other countries, they're like Japan, Turkey, China, Taiwan, they have also suffered a lot in terms of earthquake occurrences. I remember the 12th May 2008 when the Wenchuan earthquake took place. The Chinese actually preserved whatever had happened in many of the areas as an example for public to learn from what will go wrong if I don't follow the right practices. I remember they had actually kept intact those buildings which actually collapsed, and some of the educational buildings, schools, and even the whole of the village in some of the areas were preserved as an example for public to go and learn from the examples of what happened in the recent past. Similarly, I found many of these countries, they have created their earthquake simulation or experience centers, where you can go and you can just sit in a room and it will give you a jerk and a feel of earthquake of 5 magnitude, 6 magnitude, 7 magnitude, or even 8 magnitude. And how does all these elements, buildings and non-structural elements are likely to behave in those earthquake situations? It gives a very good feeling to learn that what will happen if an earthquake of magnitude 6 or 7 comes in that area. And the third thing that I learned was the memorials which have been made in the memory of those people who lost their lives because of the recent earthquakes or the past earthquakes. And these memorials are not only keeping the photographs and the information related to the people who lost lives, but also to the buildings in which they lost lives, and then the buildings before that. They're just trying to show what was the actual structure which got destroyed or affected, and what should have been the modifications so that the building may not have collapsed. So they are proposing both the structures of the designs which got affected and the designs which cannot get affected. The kind of example Hari Kumarji showed of the two buildings, one got completely damaged and the other building on the back was still intact. The difference is not in terms of the magnitude of the earthquake or its impact, but in terms of actually the quality of the construction, design of the construction, which led to the resistance against the earthquake. Then I found another example. He also talked about landslides, earthquake-induced landslides. They are very much actually now those who deal with earthquakes, neglected area for them. Although as landslide experts, we do talk about them, but when mostly we are developing the earthquake scenarios, often we lose sight of the landslides that happen or tsunami happen along with the earthquake. So now these landslides actually are very big landslides, and they are happening in very large numbers along with the earthquake. Either they are the new landslides or the reactivated landslides. And they actually obstruct our operations in terms of our response against the landslide. I remember 18th September 2011, when we went there, not only the bad weather was a constraint or the damaged roads and buildings, but also the landslides which blocked our ways, highways, and also all the infrastructure, and even affecting the secretariat of the Sikkim government itself, which changed later, and they made another one. But I'm telling you that even the governance, administration, and all these hospitals, education facilities, and even our religious buildings, many of these monasteries, churches, temples, they also got affected in such earthquakes. So which are heritage values, which do not cannot be easily evaluated in terms of cost economics. So there are many parameters which need to be considered, and we have to work a lot in these directions. And our social organizations like the AIDMI or GHI at national and international levels, they have to actually create a high level of awareness that to the last citizens, to the last person in those areas, to take cautions and to make them aware that how they protect their lives by living in their homes, because homes are made to live, not to become graves. So if they fail, they will become graves, not homes. So let's work in all these directions together. And collaboration is key to all this. It is actually emphasized in our Sunday framework for disaster risk reduction. And we are happy that IIT Roorkee has also collaborated with us in terms of the contributions as a resource person, and also GHI and AIDMI and many more need to collaborate. So more the partners, more the teams, and more the stakeholders, better would be and more efficient would we would be. So let's try to awaken, arise, and also face the challenges of the disasters that we cannot avoid or prevent, but we can always reduce their catastrophic consequences, particularly I would say. And that's our effort. That's why we are always talking in terms of risk reduction and resilience rather than just disaster management. So our approaches are checking, and not only human beings, but also the total ecosystem-based approach and all-inclusive approach. So these are some of the things I think we need to take care. And I would like to thank all these speakers and the organizations who have participated with us. Formal vote of thanks will be there, but that's my personal thanks I wanted to communicate. So thank you very much, and I think we learned a lot through these deliberations, and we'll continue these efforts. As somebody has said, learning never ends in life till we go to the last destination of our life. So the last part of life. So naturally, every time there is a new learning, and every time we interact with each other, we will always find something new. So let's continue these interactions and collaborations for risk reduction and resilience. Thank you very much, Anilji, for giving me this opportunity to make this concluding remark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir, for summing up, for blending the learning of today's webinar in your concluding address. Thank you very much. So with this, we draw the curtain of today's webinar on earthquake risk mitigation challenges and opportunities that was jointly organized by National Institute of Disaster Management, Ministry of Home Affairs, and All India Disaster Mitigation Institute. And I take this privilege to propose vote of thanks. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Surya Prakash, Head GMR Division, NIDM, and Mr. Kshitij Gupta from All India Disaster Mitigation Institute for gracing the inaugural as well as validation session, and for giving the foundation to today's webinar through their insightful deliberation. And I also take this opportunity to thank our eminent speakers, Dr. Mahuba Mukherjee, Professor, Department of Architecture and Planning, IIT Roorkee, and Dr. Hari Kumar, Coordinator, Geohazard International, for providing us this opportunity to learn and to gain from their respective vast knowledge, experience, and expertise. I would also like to thank Major General Manoj Kumar Bindal, Executive Director NIDM, and Shri Mihir Bhatt, Director AIDMI, for providing their consent to organize this collaborative webinar. And I would also like to thank our participant for joining us and for actively participating in the webinar through their queries. And organization of such event requisite collective actions. So I would like to thank my GMRD team, Dr. Harjeet Kaur, Dr. Raju Thapa, Dr. Haldar, Mr. Ritesh, Ms. Dipali, Mr. Hari, and Mr. Ajit, and also the IT team of NIDM, Mr. Balaji and Mr. Shobit, for their continuous support. And then this is to inform the participants on their asking about, querying about attendance link. There is no separate link. Attendance is automatically generated in Cisco WebEx platform. And I would also like to request participants to please have patience for a couple of days to download the certificate. As in Cisco WebEx, it takes around 7 to 8 hours to generate the attendances. And to generate the certificate, we need this attendance list. So please have patience for a couple of days. for the certificate. So with this, thank you all for joining us in this webinar. And please follow all the precautionary measures for the COVID-19. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.